Hi, everyone. I'm Saurabh. I'm co-founder of Zenskar. I primarily look at product and tech here. We help companies automate their billing, revenue accounting, and other revenue-related workflows. It's my pleasure to introduce Stephen Forth. He's the CEO and co-founder of Ibaka, a company known for helping organizations improve their pricing strategies and, price effectively. I've known Steve, for a bit. I've actually followed Steve before we got in touch with each other, and his insights have always been, pretty invaluable. And, it was a pleasure to meet Steve, like after knowing him for knowing about him for quite some time. So today, Steve will be sharing his expertise on a topic that I find like really fascinating. We are discussing NRR and how usage-based pricing and NRR are related, like how one can help the other. We are fortunate to have him with us here today and dive into his thought processes on this topic. And yeah, so welcome, Steve, and I'll let you add a little more about your background.
Oh, thank you very much, Saurabh. I'm really delighted to be here. I've been very impressed with the approach Zenskar is taking to billing management, because in the work that Ibaka does, where we are engaged to build value models and support value-based selling and value-based customer success, one of the constraints that we often run into is that the billing system cannot actually execute on the pricing models that we want to design and deliver to market. So it's fantastic to have this opportunity to speak with you and to build a future collaboration. Just a couple of words about Ibaka and myself. I think the most important thing to understand is that Ibaka is a true value-based pricing, value-based selling, value-based customer support company. And the reason I say that is we are built around having a value model. And we'll show you what we mean by that in a moment. The other part of this is that we see pricing, it's not so much about setting price levels, it's about designing pricing. And unusual, I think, for a company in this space, we are deeply involved in the design thinking community. And in fact, we manage the 375,000 member design thinking group here on LinkedIn. But Saurabh, why don't we dive in?
Yeah. Like your introduction just raises so many questions. I'd like to understand just so many just like high level things and before we get a little deep. So maybe I'll start with just like outlining like how this conversation can go and starting with like some definitions to just get everyone on the same page. So the idea of this webinar is, we have like a basic structure, but the idea is that we have like more of a free-flowing conversation where we'll get insights from Steve and I'll basically riff off of what Steve says, and it might result in like a bunch of unplanned questions, and we'll take them as things go. So yeah, the basic idea is to first understand like what NRR is. Some people define it in slightly different ways. So we'll start with like a good understanding like how you think NRR should be defined and how value-based pricing and NRR are related, and how you think usage-based pricing is related to NRR. I remembered watching a podcast where you were a guest, where you had mentioned that usage-based pricing is important to increase NRR, and this is before we had gotten in touch. So that was like really curious, and it's a great, I think it's great to have you as a guest on our webinar, because like these topics are so related. So yeah, let's get right into it. Like, so how do you define NRR? Like,
so the key thing to understand, I think, around NRR is that there are two different numbers that people use. There's gross revenue retention, and this is a very simple number. It's your previous period revenue minus revenue lost from churn in the current period. So this number, so these are measured as percentages. Well, sometimes they're measured as percentages, sometimes they're measured as raw numbers. But the key thing to remember about gross revenue retention, GRR, is that it is always going to be negative or smaller than 100%. Whereas net revenue retention can be positive. And the reason it can be positive is because it starts from your gross revenue retention, but then it adds back in, or in some cases subtracts even more, the change in revenue from your current customer base. And this, in fact, is the connection between NRR and usage-based pricing. Because if you have no mechanism from which you can increase revenue from your current customer base, then your NRR and your GRR are going to be the same number, and they are going to be smaller than 100%. So as you design your packaging and pricing, it's critical that you design in ways to grow revenue from your current customers. And if you can't do that, you are missing a huge opportunity. And in fact, I would say you are crippling your business. But why don't we pause here for a moment and do our first poll, and so that we can see what people are expecting in terms of their net revenue retention for this year. And we'll give people a few moments to respond, and then Zenskar will share the results with us.
Yeah, while the poll is going on, have you seen companies have a high NRR without a pricing that inherently scales?
No, I have not. There may be a few exceptions where a company has usage-based pricing and they're adding a lot of users, but I think that is somewhat unusual. Can we share? There we go. So that's great. So, well, we've got a couple of companies that are going to generate more than 120% NRR. That's, depending on the sector, that's best in class. Most of the companies are, in the 100 to 109% range, which is neutral. And then there is one company that is going to be less than 90% and is probably looking for ways to increase their net revenue retention.
Yeah, they've come to the right place.
So why don't we go on?
Yeah.
I just want to sort of take a quick look at what we mean by value, because the companies that are doing the best job of driving their net revenue retention are also the companies that are doing the best job of delivering value to their customers. And if you're not delivering value to your customers, you should not have a high expectation of growing your net revenue retention. And in fact, one of the reasons that investors look so hard at net revenue retention is because it's one of the best financial measures of value to the customer. If your customers are growing their usage and spending more money on you, that's a pretty good indicator that you're creating more value. But when we say value, we're very specifically talking about the economic value that is being provided to the customer. When we think about this at Ivica, we look at 6 ways that companies provide value to their customers. They can help them increase their revenue. They can help them to reduce operating costs. They can help them to reduce operating capital, which is actually an important thing in a high interest rate environment. They can help to reduce or defer capital investment. They can reduce risks, and they can increase options. Now, those are your positive value drivers. There are negative value drivers, and the most important of these are the unique costs of your solution, which of course includes your price, but it can include things other than price as well, such as training costs or integration costs, or the amount of time people spend using your system, and shortcomings that your solutions have. So I just want to reinforce here that everything we're talking about today has to be supported and underwritten by the value you are creating to your customers. Yeah, so I'm just going to say that having a value model is critical to being able to really design effective usage-based pricing.
Yeah, so I think for our audience, it might help to understand what the main, from your point of view, what's the main difference between value and price? Why are they two different words, and why is it not the same thing?
Yeah. So you have to create more value for your customer than you claim back in price. So let's just say that by using a solution, I am going to get an extra $1 million of value per year. Mm-hmm. So some people say, well, we're creating $1 million of value for you, so we are going to charge you $500,000. That is almost always a mistake. In the B2B SaaS industry, that value capture ratio, or the ratio of the value you create to your price, is generally somewhere between 5% and 30%. And it's only 30% in very mature sectors.
Interesting.
So, value does not equal price, and value does not equal willingness to pay. Value is an input. It's one of the things that determines willingness to pay, but they are not the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Yeah. And it's great to hear like the rules of thumb. How you reach this sort of like a number? Like how do you find that
Yeah,
percentage?
I think there's, that comes from a number of areas. One is long experience, as you can see from my gray hair and lack of hair, that I've been doing this for a long time. But we've also collected over the years a lot of benchmarking data. And, and we found that in B2B SaaS, and really all of the examples and benchmarks that we're talking about today are B2B SaaS benchmarks. But within B2B SaaS, most companies are claiming, and Ibica has a value management platform called Valio. So if I look across the data in Valio, I see that the value capture ratio ranges, well, it can be lower, it can be as low as 2 or 3%, but that's usually because there's been an error in pricing. It can be as high as 50%, and that's usually because something bad has happened and the company is not delivering as much value as it had expected to.
Interesting.
So this is a critical number to track because value is a leading indicator of net revenue retention.
Yeah, makes sense.
So there can be two things happening here, right? One is you've set prices too high and your customers are not getting the amount of value that they anticipated. That can lead to churn and it can lead to pushback. Or if something's happened in the market, so perhaps you have a service where you help do lead generation.
Yeah.
And a competitor has come in with a generative AI-based lead generation solution that is far more effective, then the comparative value that you're providing has dropped, and you are likely to see increased churn as people switch over to the alternative that is providing more value. And when this happens, if you have an alternative enter the market that is creating a lot more value, you can drop your prices all you like, and you're not going to fix the situation.
Yeah.
In most cases, the solution to churn and improving net revenue retention is not to lower prices. It's to find ways to increase more value, to increase the value.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. So let's go on. One of the challenges that we often see is that people talk about net revenue retention and they only talk about the top level number. And that's the only number that they report. And the problem with that is that doesn't give you the insight that you need to really manage NRR. So in fact, there are as many as 3 different positive factors that can drive up net revenue retention. Those are growth in package, upsell, and cross-sell, but they're countered by 3 negative factors: churn, shrinkage in package, and downsell. And here we've grouped the positive factors and negative factors together, but in many cases, what you want to do is, if you have growth in package, then you probably also have shrinkage in package, and you want to compare the customers that are growing and the customers that are shrinking. So those 2 factors are often looked at together. The same thing with upsell. An upsell is when you have, for example, a good, better, best style architecture. So, you increase your revenue as you move people from the good package to the better package and the better package to the best package. But of course, if you have the possibility of upsell, you also have the possibility of downsell, where people are going from your best package to your better package, or your better package to your good package.
Yeah.
When you're looking at NRR, you always have to look at all the factors together and look at how they interact.
Yeah, and like I'd imagine that the cost of improving each of these factors is different. Some of these just scale with the way you price, some of these need more active effort. So like how do you compare, like these various factors?
I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but one thing I'd like to underline here is that most people start by focusing on churn. How do we decrease churn?
Mhm.
That's a good place to start, because if you lose a customer, you're never going to have a chance to upsell them or to grow with them. However, every industry and every company has a natural rate of churn, and in no case is it zero. If you are
Yep.
close to your natural rate of churn, investing more and more to decrease it even more gives you diminishing returns. So
Mhm.
it's really critical for every company to understand what the natural rate of churn is and to get close to it, but not to try to push the rock up a cliff.
Yeah, like ultimately the incremental return on like each of these need like their own kinds of investment, and each of them has its own kind of return, and you basically compare and evaluate and you pick the best one that wins.
And one thing, and especially with this growth in package and shrinkage in package, this is actually the critical one for most companies. In fact, if I look at the actual data,
Mhm.
there is not as much upsell as most people think.
Interesting.
So,
Right.
most people go into a package and it's difficult to get them to change packages. So there's a lot of resistance to changing packages. And they moan and groan when you try to upsell them and say, you should have sold me the right package at the same time. You should just give me the extra stuff without me having to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Very interesting. Yeah, I'm excited. Let's get to it.
so we talked about the positive factors and the negative factors.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so this is in just for their, for their growth. And let's take a quick poll here so people can say which of these positive and negative factors are most important to their current strategy. And give people a bit of time to respond.
Yeah, so while people are responding, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you can give a preview of, some of the examples that you're talking about. You can just give a sense of, what's coming.
Yeah. So each year, Ibica works with the venture capital firm Peakspan
Mhm.
to do a major survey of net revenue retention in B2B SaaS. And
I've seen these reports. They're like really good.
yeah, so we're currently working on the report for 2024. We got responses from more than 500 companies, and we're
Oh,
actually going to
large
share
number.
some early examples. So this is good. Yeah, not often when we do these polls, we get almost 70 or 80% of company talking about churn, and here we have just under half, whereas the same number of companies are really focused on increasing growth in package through usage-based pricing. So this is good. We've got a good group of companies with us here today.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a preview of some of the results from the Peakspan Ibica survey of net revenue retention. So this is the top performer. This is, of the 500 companies, this is the one
That
that is doing best.
that looks
And
crazy. Like, what are
this
those
is
numbers? Yeah.
pretty freaking impressive, right?
Yeah.
It's got an NRR of 200%. So you'll not be surprised that investors are beating down the doors to get into this company.
And
Uh,
this just remind me, this does not include new customers.
this does not
It
include customers. This is what they're
that is
doing.
that is crazy.
Yeah, so this is what the best of the best looks like. And you'll notice that they have relatively low churn, but they have huge growth in package. And their priorities, their number one priority is to grow in package. Their second priority is to reduce shrinkage in package, because remember, when you're doing this work, you segment into customers that are growing versus customers that are shrinking and understand the differences between the two. So this is what the best looks like. However, let's go on.
How many of such companies have you ever seen?
Uh, well, the one historically that was sort of like that was Snowflake. Snowflake had, I don't know if they ever got to 200%. Somebody on the call may know, but they were close to 200% in their high growth period. And even today, for a company with what, I forget what their revenue is, but it's measured in billions. I think in their last quarter, they were at 138%.
Okay, that's still pretty impressive for their size.
Yeah, it's still pretty impressive. Here's what the worst company looked like. So this company clearly has a churn problem. Its churn is what's driving its net revenue retention down, but it's also shrinking. Or last year, it shrank in terms of the revenue it was getting per customer. So they have a double problem. If you look at what they believe they are going to achieve this year, they have slightly lower churn, and they have turned around the shrinkage so that they have slight growth. And this is a CRM for SMBs, and frankly, I think it is a bit long in the tooth. They don't have any free offer. They have no usage-based pricing. And even though they're expecting some improvement this year, their real problem is that they need to innovate. And they will continue, as long as they do not innovate, they will continue to shrink.
Got it. Like, how much of it would you attribute to like the actual value versus the pricing?
I think I would attribute 100% of it to the value and having better alternatives. This is not a problem that they will be able to fix with pricing.
Got it.
And, I think of pricing really as a doctor thinks about your blood pressure or your pulse. It's a symptom. And you have to go beyond the symptom to understand the causes. Here's the company with the highest churn. And this is a fintech company targeting business professionals. And they're in the process of working on a turnaround. So this company has, churn of almost 25%.
Oh, wow. That's significant. Yeah.
That's scary, which is why it's a turnaround. But they're able to grow their revenues, but they're really focused on reducing churn. And I think that the focus on reducing churn is almost too high, because you'll see that although the churn is expected to go down, the net expansion is shrinking as well.
Yeah, that I was just going to ask that. Like both of them have gone down, which is not
Yeah.
ideal.
So it's not necessarily a great thing, but clearly this company had to reduce its churn.
Yeah.
So it's doing the right thing, right? Reduce churn first, then work on expansion.
Yeah.
Because as we said earlier, right, if you're losing customers, your opportunities to expand shrink. Now that's the common sense point of view, but let's look at this next company. This is a high growth generative AI company. And when I first looked at the survey data, this actually was the company with the highest NRR. Some of these higher performing ones, slipped in towards the end of the survey. But what's super interesting here, right, is that this is a company with high churn.
Yeah, that's like it's as absurd as the last one.
Yeah, it's got
The
high
churn
churn,
number.
but a huge expansion. And here's what I think is happening here. So generative AI is a relatively new technology. I know some people will say it's been with us for 4 or 5 years, but most of us have only been thinking about it for the last 2 years. And the use cases and the value are not always clear. So what this company is doing is it's taking in customers. Some of those customers say, you know what, cool, but I can't get value, I'm going to leave. Some customers, though, figure out how they can get value. And so they grow a lot. So in very early stage markets where there is a lot of innovation happening, but the innovation has not necessarily been well connected to value, I think that this is probably a common pattern, and it's just become very clear in generative AI because things are moving so quickly. But Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. Like, and in fact, here it looks like a case of the customer having to figure out the value themselves, as opposed to like the company telling them this is how you get value potentially.
Yeah, and if you look at the pricing model, like many of the generative AI model-based companies, they price using tokens, which
Yeah.
You can say that token-based pricing is usage-based pricing, but it's also, I think, generally a form of cost-based pricing, because for Gen AI, the compute costs are high, and the compute cost is really based on the number of input tokens and the number of output tokens. So I think most of the Gen AI companies are actually executing on some version of cost plus pricing, and they've tied their costs to their usage.
Got it.
And there's a huge opportunity in Gen AI, and I think this is what we're going to see in the second generation generative AI apps and the vertical generative AI apps, to do a much better job of connecting to pricing. And I think Intercom has done this with its chatbot, where you pay per issue resolved. So that's a
Fascinating. I was just going to ask you that, have you seen like the newer age companies, like especially the ones using Gen AI, price on value and not on cost? And
yeah. So I think that Intercom is doing that, and I also think Box has a very interesting pricing model. Maybe we can do another webinar, Sarah, where we go into this in more detail.
yeah, that would be fascinating. Yeah.
So those were four examples from the 500 odd companies in the PeakSpan Ithaca survey. But let's talk about another thing that we found, which is that usage-based pricing has grown from about 20% of SaaS companies to more than 40% over the past 3 years. And so why is this happening? Well, one reason is that people such as Kyle Poyer at OpenView and myself have talked up usage-based pricing. So part of it is it's the cool thing. Second is, and far more important though, is I think usage-based pricing makes it possible to grow NRR by expanding revenue from your current customer base without having to do upsell or cross-sell. But it also comes with the risk of shrinkage in package if use declines. And one of the things we're looking at as we parse the data from our NRR survey, is, are there companies that usage-based pricing is hurting more than it's helping?
Yeah, that would be interesting to know, because it does work both ways, and especially companies that have spiky usage, it is a better way to price, but then you have like a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, and I'm going to just push back on that gently. I'd say usage-based pricing is a better way to price when the usage is connected to value. So let's take an example. There are some companies where the more you use the software, you use the software a lot because it's badly designed, and it takes a lot of clicks and a lot of effort to get it to do what you want to do. And I don't think that that's a good example of usage-based pricing.
Mhm.
So the unit of use that I think we should price on is the idea of a value path and value path completion. So a value path is a series of steps that you take on an application that results in something of value. And whether it takes you 5 steps or 20 steps or actions, it's getting to that conclusion where something of value has been created that really matters. And there are companies such as Pendo and some of Pendo's alternatives that make it pretty easy to define value paths in your software. So the best form of usage-based pricing is the one that measures the usage that's resulting in something of value. Now, I don't have the data to do a really deep analysis, so I'm going to speculate here, but I'm going to speculate that the companies that are getting the biggest results and the best results from usage-based pricing are also the companies that have done the best job of connecting usage to value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, following on from that, it sounds like your usage may not be the actual thing that gets you value. So like even in the case of the Gen AI companies that you spoke about, like the same product could provide value to different companies in different ways, right? So how do people think about that?
Yeah, that's part of the magic of value-based pricing. And I believe that B2B SaaS is the field where we can best apply value-based pricing because we have the data to connect usage to value. So to do that, you need to have a value model. But really, B2B SaaS is the ideal laboratory for developing really effective usage-based pricing that connects to value, and the companies that do that are the companies that are really winning in the field.
Okay.
So let's do our final, actually, one more poll. So what is your pricing strategy today?
While people are answering, we have some questions from the audience. We can take
Right.
one of them. So Sriram asks, in the example slides, what does net expansion mean if it's not new customers? Is it subscription sale of new package or upsell to existing customers?
So net expansion, and because this is survey data, we don't have the granular data. It means growth in package minus shrinkage in package plus upsell minus downsell plus cross-sell. And the reason it's net is because it has both the growth, but it also has the shrinkage. It has the upsell, but it also has the downsell.
Yeah, so basically it's everything to do with existing customers and not accounting for new sales at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's net because it has the good and the bad. Fantastic. So again, we've got 46% that are already using usage-based pricing. So that's great. I hope that the way you've designed it, the usage is connected to value. And we've got another 46% that want to try usage-based pricing. And again, I think the key to success here is to find the forms of use of your solution that are most closely tied to value. So how do we do this? How do we align value and use? So I believe it is impossible to do this without a value model. So the first thing that you need to do is to build a value model and then look at all of the variables or the inputs into the model and say which of these are usage variables.
Mhm.
And once you understand which are usage variables, then ask which of these variables is most correlated with value. So for each of the variables, you do a simple test. You say, if there's a 1% increase in usage, how much does the value go up? And it's virtually never 1%. So I have seen cases where a 1% increase in usage can deliver a 50 or 100% increase in value. And there's an interesting story on the blog post that Ibica published today that Tom Nagel, who is the godfather of value-based pricing, tells. It's an industrial story. It's not a software story, where O-rings, the use of Kevlar O-rings in chemical plants, they last 3 times as long. But because they last 3 times as long, in plants that have continuous operation, they have a huge amount of value. On the other hand, in plants that are seasonal and shut down seasonally, they actually have very little value. So one has to look deep into these questions in order to really align value and use and design usage-based pricing that connects to value. The other thing,
it's interesting because I think it's similar to how cars sell. Different cars are popular in like long running, like taxi sort of use cases versus personal use cases. Personal use cases, most things work. But when you start going into like the taxi and especially like the long distance, car usage, you see like specific engines and specific makes doing better than other companies.
yeah, I've had some very interesting conversations with London cabbies on my last few trips to London, where they're really trying to understand if they should switch to electric taxis, to EV taxis.
Yeah.
And one of the things that determines is how far outside of London the taxi driver lives. So if the taxi driver lives way outside London and has to consume batteries while driving into London, the EV is not so attractive. For taxi drivers that live in London, there's a compelling business case for the EV taxis, and they've largely already transitioned.
Interesting. Very interesting. And just one more question on this slide, build a value model. That sounds like a loaded sentence, like, and probably, might need like a longer time span, but maybe if you can just like briefly touch on how does one go about building a value model?
Yeah, so the critical thing to do is to understand the impact that your solution has on your customers' profit and loss statement, and in a few cases on its balance sheet. But for most of us, we don't do anything that really impacts the balance sheet directly. So it's really to ask, how does my solution impact my customer's profit and loss statement? And to do it by going through those 6 classes of value driver that we looked at earlier. Do I help them increase revenue? Do I help them reduce costs? Do I help them reduce operating capital?
And is it just through like questions you just like ask them, or do you like estimate it? Like how much of it is through like actual interviews versus, just like brainstorming
So the way
internally?
that we do this at Imica is we build a value model, and we've built hundreds of value models, so we have a lot of experience doing this. Then we go out and validate it through interviews. So we actually do value validation interviews using a version of the value model.
Interesting.
But then we also take all of the existing data and run it through the value model and look and see how much value is probably being created for each customer. And then go beyond that and look at how that value is impacting things like net revenue retention. So value models, I think, are the key to the future. One of the things we're doing right now is we are looking at how pricing and approaches to pricing are going to need to change as more and more generative AI applications are being adopted. And we're calling this approach generative pricing. And it starts with a value model, but it also relies on having highly configurable applications so that you can configure based on optimizing the value to the customer. At Ibica, we deeply believe that you have to optimize value to the customer first, and all good things flow from that. So pricing experts that try to optimize price without thinking about value often hurt their customers.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there, you really need to begin with how you create value. And I know I'm getting into an advanced topic here. Another really important thing to understand is how you deliver value over time. So companies that use customer journey maps should have a pricing swim lane in their customer journey map so that they know how value is delivered over time. Some companies deliver almost all of their value in the first 3 months. And then after that, the value tapers off quickly. Those companies, unless they're very careful about how they design their pricing, are at high risk of churn because, hey, I use it for 3 months. I got all the value I wanted. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Other companies have value that builds slowly over time. And in that case, and those are the companies where, pricing that grows in line with value can be really effective. And then there's some companies that are more like an insurance policy. I know I may need this sometime in the future. I don't know when I'll need it, but if I don't have it, I'm screwed. So that sort of company needs to price much more like a pricing insurance than pricing a standard SaaS application.
Yeah, that the value is like the safety over time, I guess. So it is almost like a fixed, yeah.
Yeah, and then finally there's seasonal companies, right? Where let's just say you're serving the ski industry. They really need your service from optimistically November to March, assuming it's a good snow. They don't need you at all during the summer. So, but on the other hand, they don't want to lose data. So, understanding value over time and how it changes and the different patterns is also really critical when it comes to designing pricing.
Yeah, we've seen this with companies that sell to schools and universities because they have like semesters and they have summer breaks and winter breaks, and we've seen some very fascinating business models where, they price differently when the semester is on and they price differently when the semester is off. And that's how their contracts are structured.
Yeah. Yeah, you see it a lot in travel and hotel industry as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. So so seasonal changes in value also require their own special pricing models.
Yeah.
So this is really how you align value to use. I mean, we could go into deep detail here, but why don't we go on and just sort of start to wrap things up here. Why is an NRR so important? So one thing is it should be easier to grow your current customers than to find new ones. This is, of course, only true if you've designed a pricing model that allows you to grow your current customers. Also, high net revenue retention companies tend to have lower customer acquisition costs. And finally, high NRR is a really strong signal of product market fit. So if you think back to that example of the CRM that was dated, that's a company that probably had product market fit at one time, but it's slipping away from them.
Makes sense. And like given that you work with so many companies on implementing this sort of like a pricing strategy, and especially with a focus on high NRR, on improving people's NRR, like what are the main challenges that you've seen people face when implementing it practically? Like how have you seen people implement this practically, and what are the main challenges you've seen?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to understand churn, because you always need to look at churn first and try to understand, is churn at or close to the level of natural churn for the company,
Mhm.
or for the industry and the size of the company. Because if churn is high, that's the first thing that you need to fix. And let me give a couple of examples. So we've seen companies where it takes 6 to 12 months to start delivering value. And they were churning a lot of their customers in that first 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Because after people, they bought it and they're excited, but then, oh, I'm still not getting value. Now, if they'd kept with it and kept on going, they would have seen the value start building, but they were giving up and churning before they started to see value. So that's one critical area. We always encourage people to look at churn first, but once you get to the up close to the natural level of churn, trying to reduce churn further is diminishing returns and can be counterproductive. Then the next thing we find it's best to look at is, how do you grow in package? As I've said, there's a lot of talk about good, better, best pricing. A lot of people seem to think good, better, best pricing is the best practice. I think it's over-indexed. I think that there are a lot of companies that feel that switching to GBB or good, better, best is going to solve their pricing problems, and it's not. So, having said that, there are cases where it's a fantastic design, where it has all sorts of good outcomes and where upsell is possible and downsell can be minimized. But generally speaking, you're going to drive higher NRR with growth in package than you are through upsell. There are exceptions, but as a general rule, that's been my experience. And finally, the other thing I think that is really crucial is to separate out the positive from the negative. So look at the growth in package and look at shrinkage in package separately.
Mhm.
And contrast the companies. What kind of company is shrinking? Why is it shrinking? What kind of company is growing? Why is it growing? So those are the critical things. First is get churn down. Second is make sure that you understand how your pricing design and packaging is going to impact your net revenue retention. And for many companies, not all, but for many, growth in package is more important. And then finally, look at the positive and negative examples in your customer base separate from each other. Don't just look at net growth in package. Look at the companies separately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks for that.
And I think we have one final poll question.
And let me see if we have some more questions from the audience. So Mark asks, in a typical peak span company, who owns pricing and building a value model? CEO, sales, product?
That's a fantastic question. The truth is it changes over time. So I believe that early on, it should be product that owns it. And because understanding how you create value is critical to building the right product.
Yeah.
Over time, it often transitions either to the CFO, because it feels sort of financially, and there's lots of numbers and equations. So CFOs tend to like that sort of stuff. So it often does move to the CFO's office, but it also quite frequently ends up with the chief revenue officer and the person responsible for driving revenue. And in some cases, it actually moves to customer success. Because if you think about it, it's the customer success function that has the most influence over renewals and churn. So they're the people that are most concerned with it. So depending on the stage of the company, it probably should start with product. Then depending on the revenue model and the corporate orientation, it should go to either the chief revenue officer or the head of customer success. And in many cases, the CFO is engaged because they have the technical skills to work with these sorts of things.
That's like really good insight, because even I reached this, like the fact that product and customer success are important to, it's important for them to be involved in pricing discussions is like so interesting and so non-intuitive, where like most companies think that it should be sales, marketing, or finance, but true people who understand the value that your product brings, product and customer success. And so it's like really important to also have them be part of the conversation.
Yeah. And if your product people don't understand how you're creating value, you've got a real problem. Now, just want to wrap up here with a comment on billing systems. Ithaca designs a lot of pricing models, and one of the things we've learned is to check what the billing system is actually capable of delivering. And it's really important for companies that want to adopt usage-based pricing and adopt best practices and value-based pricing, that they choose a billing system that can support what they need.
Yeah, we've seen this be like, all the customers that come to us, are struggling with this. And we've seen this in a lot of cases where whenever people need pricing that scales, it's like hard to find solutions, especially people who have complex pricing terms where they want to structure pricing differently for different customers, or it's not just like a cookie cutter usage-based or subscription price. They come to us. So yeah, like, can you give some examples of like challenges that you've seen with customers where they want to price based on value, but it has actually been a challenge?
I think they fall into two groups.
Mhm.
So one is that they have a custom billing system that they built themselves, where it can take months, if not a year, to change the billing system because they're dependent on internal engineering resources to do it.
Mhm.
And the second is when they are relying on either a very simple, billing system that was designed for consumer pricing, or they are trying to rely on their finance system or their CRM. And it's like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole.
Yeah, it's great to hear, someone from the outside like actually say it, because it's different when it comes from somebody outside than from us, because we hear it from customers and it sounds like of course we'd say it, but it's good to hear it coming from someone who's actually seen it from the other side.
Well, thank you very much, Saurabh. I think we're at the top of the
Yeah,
hour. I
yeah,
really enjoyed doing this with you. And yeah, Zenskar is, I think, building the kind of billing system that people are going to need going forward into this era of generative AI and vertically enabled SaaS applications.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And Steve and Ibaka, they've been known to help like a lot of companies do great at improving their pricing plans, figuring out packaging and how to price, figuring out how their companies, how their customers get value. So yeah, like if you'd like to reach out to Steven, I think the best way to reach out to him is via LinkedIn, and we can also drop your email address on chat. Like, what's the best way to reach out to you, Steve?
Yeah, I think email is probably best, Stephen with a V at ibica.com. And I think we have our email addresses right at the top here.
Yeah, we also pasted it on chat. So best way to reach out to Steven is by email. You can reach out to me at saurabh@zenskar.com. And thanks a lot, Steven. We've gone over time. I've taken up a lot of your time, and thanks for patiently answering all my questions. And thanks for structuring your thoughts with this deck. And it was super, like I gained a lot out of it personally. So thank you so much.
This stuff is fun for me. I can't believe people pay me to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I love it.
Great.
And
Thank
thanks
you.
a lot, Steve. See you.